And Dr. Chris Murray is on the line with us, senior research scientist with the EcoHealth Alliance, the website ecohealthalliance.org. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much.
Or Dr. Murray, I should say.
That's fine.
Tell me about the how climate change is playing a role in the spread of Ebola.
Okay, so with Ebola, I think the science is not in yet about how climate change is impacting the risk of Ebola. There are a number of ways that climate change could contribute to future risks of Ebola, and that's because Ebola is a disease that lives in animals, and those animals are subject to environmental conditions and their
It's principally bats, isn't it?
Bats is definitely one of the implicated reservoirs for Ebola virus, but people also get Ebola directly from eating other animals that have been potentially in contact with bats. So, for example, people eating bushmeat, such as primates or whatever, have contracted Ebola that way.
Right.
And so climate change has the capacity to shift the distributions of species and contact patterns with bats, and that's one potential mechanism.
If you look at the global maps that have global climate change superimposed on them, the warming Earth, what you see is that across the northern central part of Africa, the desert expanding as the planet warms, and I'm just wondering if these countries, Sierra Leone and Guinea and whatnot, that are that historically have been in an area that is very, very lush, if they're drying out, and if that might be what's driving people farther and farther into remote areas where they're exposing themselves to these viruses. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's definitely possible, and probably one of the other things is the impact on the actual landscape. The loss of forests and native systems, and that kind of brings people into greater contact with wildlife that are in the areas. And so, as you have these sort of changing contact patterns between animals and humans, as these major landscape level processes are impacting animal distributions and behaviours, that's when you start to see the potential increase in risk from diseases spilling over from wildlife.
What are the things, the other health considerations outside of Ebola that are vulnerable to exacerbation as a consequence of global climate change? What should be on our radar screen? Are we misplacing our priorities?
Well, I think the public health community has started to take climate change much more seriously as an issue. I think there's been a lot of attention on vector-borne diseases in particular, because those vectors themselves are subject to distributional changes under changing climates. So vector-borne diseases have had a lot of focus, but there's also been some attention given to, say, waterborne pathogens, for example, things like Giardia. Also in the food industry, things like Salmonella, they're temperature dependent in terms of their replication, their rate of replication, and so increasing temperatures has the potential to increase risks from a bunch of different types of diseases.
Are there any diseases or parts of the world where we can now, in 2014, say, oh, right here, as a consequence of global climate change, we saw this impact on public health?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty is that a lot of the mechanisms around infectious diseases are all kind of intercorrelated, and so it is quite difficult to pull out a specific signal of climate change for any specific system. That said, there are a lot of very convincing correlational studies that show, for example, changes in distributions under recent climate change. So climate change is something that is already here. The planet's already warmed by something like 0.6 of a degree compared to historical averages. So things are changing, and we are seeing things like the northern extension of tick ranges, the ticks that carry Lyme disease, and things like tick-borne encephalitis in Europe. Those things are actually on the march northwards as a result of climates becoming more suitable for the vector. Right. in those areas.
One of the things that we saw here in the D.C. area last winter was that and across much of the United States, was that as the temperature gradient the temperature difference between the mid-latitudes, where most of us live, and the temperate latitudes and the Arctic latitudes, the northern latitudes, as that temperature gradient has diminished because the Arctic is warming 5 or 6 times faster than the mid-latitudes are, as that temperature differential has changed, the strength of the jet stream, with this wall of air that kind of is blocked or held into place by that temperature gradient, it has started just drooling down over the rest of North America, at least east of the Rockies. The Rockies have now become the physical barrier that keeps the jet stream in place to the north, thus blocking its access to California and whatnot. But could it be that the new normal is we're going to have these polar vortexes every winter in the Midwest and the East Coast of the United States? And if so, are we going to see things like black flies moving from Vermont down to D.C.?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me that's a question I can't really answer. I'm not really like a climatologist or a meteorologist, but certainly the change, there is going to be a major change in weather patterns. There has already been a change in weather patterns, like you're pointing out, and that definitely has the potential to change the distributions of things like black flies, which I know from a recent camping experience can be quite
oh yeah, I lived in Vermont, New Hampshire. Black flies are the scourge, the springtime scourge. Right.
Yeah. So I think that kind of illustrates the general mechanism. If black flies are carrying infectious diseases that can get into people, and the distribution of black flies is changing as a direct result of changing climate patterns, that's the sort of mechanisms that we're talking about in terms of increasing disease risks for people under a different climate.
Yeah, fascinating. What about good old-fashioned things like the flu, and whatever happened to SARS? I mean, and for that matter, there was this SARS-like virus that was coming out of Saudi Arabia that everybody was all very concerned about, and suddenly has vanished from the headlines. Apparently, camels were the vector on that. I don't even remember the acronym now. Can you bring us up to date on those things?
Yeah, sure. So the one that came out of Saudi Arabia was called MERS, or Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. It probably has a bat reservoir actually, and camels are implicated in also hosting that virus. It's a coronavirus similar to SARS. It killed a few people, and it certainly grabbed the headlines because it showed early on sort of SARS-like properties that really sort of scared the global public.
Is that still going on, and we're just ignoring it because of Ebola, or has it been stopped?
To be honest, I don't know what the latest case numbers on MERS is. I'd actually have to check with somebody that's working on that. But certainly it's dropped out of the public eye, possibly as a result of the enormous Ebola epidemic that's really taken over there.
Right. And SARS, another coronavirus, another virus that's related to the common cold. That just, it came out of bushmeat in China. One of the cats, wasn't it? A serval?
A civet cat, yep.
Civet cat, that's right. And, we nailed it down. We stopped it, apparently. It's gone forever, or it's gone back into the wild reservoir?
Yeah, very likely it's still circulating in wild animal reservoirs. Civets were the kind of the link. Civets were brought into a market situation, and then infected other animals in the market that then got sold, and that's how it kind of spread out of the wildlife reservoir and into human populations. It did cause quite a lot of panic because it started killing people, and that was obviously a very alarming thing. But also it had very big impacts on economic kind of processes, so that you had impacts on travel and trade and
right. Yeah, people were afraid to fly. I mean, it was an amazing time.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Dr. Chris Murray, Senior Research Scientist with the EcoHealth Alliance. Hang on just a second, Dr. Murray.
Sure.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Guy always steps on you. EcoHealthAlliance.org is the website. Thank you, Dr. Murray.
No problems.
Great talking with you. Thank you very much. We'll be back.